Hello everybody, and welcome to another episode of AP Euroblast. I'm standing here in front of the Muralla de Revellín in Logroño, Spain. In the 16th century, this wall here surrounded all of the city, but right now this is about all that is left of it. And right over there, there's a museum inside that tower and inside the wall, and it's really nice. You can visit it for free. Right now, this place is kind of quiet, but every June 11th, this place comes really alive as the people of Logroño celebrate the festivities of San Bernabé. And they remember then the siege that they resisted from the French attack. It lasted for about 3 weeks. Legend has it that the people of Logroño remained strong because of the fresh fish that they had from the Ebro River. And from the good wine that they had from Logroño's vineyards. It's hard sometimes to separate legend from fact, but in any case, what we can say is that this attack was an important part of local, regional, national, and even European-wide history. So stick around to learn more. Logroño was a small piece of Charles V's global empire, but it took center stage at the beginning of his reign in a decades-long European-wide conflict with Charles's nemesis, Francis I, King of France. The gateway here gives testimony to how important it was at the time to the emperor. In particular, the city's coat of arms got a makeover. As per Charles's order, Logroño was allowed to add 3 Fleurs de Lys, the symbol of France, to its shield. The wall you see, in fact, was built after the attack to replace the old one. And this was but one of the ways that Logroño grew and became stronger in the 16th century, and all because Charles, in gratitude for Logroño's resistance, exempted the city from paying taxes. Why was the defense of this small city so important to Charles, you might ask? Good question. To answer it, we need to look at several contexts: the context of Spain, the context of this region, and the context of the shifting balance of power in Europe. In 1479, Isabella of Castile and Ferdinand of Aragon consolidated their control over the 2 biggest kingdoms of the Iberian Peninsula. And in 1492, they completed the reconquest of Granada. The Kingdom of Navarre, between Castile and Aragon, and stretching into France, remained independent. It relied heavily on support from France, though. Logroño was thus an important Castilian frontier outpost whose control would be equally important to Castilian and Navarrese aspirations. Now, following Isabella's death in 1504 and a strategic second marriage 2 years later, Ferdinand made his move on Navarre, and in 1512 he integrated most of it into the Kingdom of Castile. A small sliver of the kingdom remained in modern-day France, along with its king, Henry II. On his own, he was no match for Ferdinand, but he had important allies along the Pyrenees Mountains, and more importantly, he had the King of France on his side, and within just a few years, he would make that alliance even stronger by marrying the King of France's sister. So when Ferdinand died in 1516, Navarre and France had a golden opportunity to reclaim territory lost to Castile and to destabilize Spain and its growing global power. Ferdinand's heir, his grandson Charles, was young and inexperienced. Henry II was even younger, but Charles was a foreigner in his own kingdom. He'd grown up in the Netherlands, he had never been to Spain, and he didn't even speak Spanish. Early attempts to take back Navarre in 1516 were weak, and they failed, but 4 years later things had changed. Henry and Francis had a new opportunity when Castilian cities rose up against Charles in the revolt of the Comuneros. The exact nature of the Comunero revolt is hotly debated by historians and is a fascinating episode in Spanish history. What everyone can agree on, though, is that 1, it was trouble for Charles, and 2, the main reasons that the Comuneros objected to Charles were the following. First, Charles was Flemish, he wasn't Castilian. Second, the Comuneros much preferred Juana and Ferdinand, Charles's mother and brother, both of whom were Castilian born and raised. Third, the Comuneros did not like being ignored for top appointments that went to Flemish advisors like Adrian of Utrecht. And last, the money that was spent on becoming the Holy Roman Emperor meant that money was leaving Spain, and also that Charles would be increasingly outside of Spain in order to attend to matters in other parts of his realm. Now, within this rebellion of the Comuneros, Logroño notably stayed loyal to Charles and did not join the movement. After a year of fighting, Charles soundly defeated the Comuneros at the Battle of Villalar, and the main leaders were executed. But by that time, Henry and Francis's plans for invasion of Navarre were well underway. Beyond Navarre, beyond Spain even, Charles had become much more powerful, with the titles he inherited from his four grandparents. Through his maternal grandparents, Isabel and Ferdinand, he already controlled Castile and Aragon, whose territories extended throughout the Mediterranean to Italy and across the Atlantic to the Americas. Through his paternal grandparents, Mary and Maximilian, he controlled Austria, Burgundy, and the Netherlands. With Charles becoming the Holy Roman Emperor, France was literally surrounded by territories controlled by Charles. So the invasion took on a new urgency in addition to the wars that were being fought in Italy and in the Netherlands over the next several decades. Well, less than a month after the defeat of the Comuneros, Franco-Navarrese troops under André de Foix, also known as General Asparot, captured Pamplona, which was the capital of Navarre. And among other things, the Navarrese assault ended the military career of a young soldier, Ignatius Loyola, whose leg was shattered in multiple places by a cannonball as he attempted to defend the city for Castile. 13 years later, Loyola would go on to establish the Jesuit order, which had a global effect on the spread of Christianity and continues to have an influence through multiple Jesuit-run universities in the United States and elsewhere. Okay. Within 3 weeks of taking Pamplona, Foix's troops controlled all of Navarre. And in order to consolidate their victories, Foix now turned his sights on Logroño, just across the border in Castile. And the people of Logroño knew what was coming their way. 4 days before the siege began, on the very day that Pamplona fell, in fact, an open council meeting was held in the Church of Santiago. Despite being badly outnumbered, the citizens of Logroño decided there that they would resist the siege, and a war council was formed. Those 4 days gave the Logroñeses time to stock up on food and other items and may have been crucial to the city's defense. It must have been an intense 3 weeks inside these walls. But then on June 11th, the day of San Bernabé, or St. Barnabas in English, with news of the approach of 20,000 Castilian and Aragonese soldiers, the siege broke and Foix and his troops withdrew. The Castilian Aragonese troops pursued them and defeated them soundly on June 30th, just outside Pamplona, in the Battle of Noain. And thus ended the moment when Logroño was at the center of European history. But its aftermath is also important. Francis and his successors would continue to harass and weaken Spanish hegemony in other parts of Europe for many years to come. And eventually in the 17th century, through the 30 Years' War, they succeeded in becoming the dominant European power. The Navarrese never presented another serious threat to Charles's control of the Iberian Peninsula, and his son, Philip II, would go on, through marriage rather than conquest, to bring Portugal under Spain's control for 80 years. The Navarrese, in one sense though, would end up having the last laugh on France as well as on Spain. In 1589, Henry of Navarre's grandson, also Henry, became the first Bourbon king of France. And when the Spanish Habsburg line ran out of heirs in 1700, it was a French Bourbon, Philip V, who claimed and won the Spanish crown. In the 20th century, the monarchy disappeared, first under the Second Republic, and then under the 4-year dictatorship of Francisco Franco. But when the monarchy came back, it was a Bourbon who took the throne, and it is a Bourbon who holds it today. Thus, ironically, Spain's King Philip VI is a direct descendant of the Navarrese King Henry II, who rose up against the Emperor Charles V. So I want to return to where we started with the Muralla de Revellín and the city of Logroño. As I mentioned at the beginning, this city was able to grow because Charles V exempted Logroño from paying taxes to the crown. Today, this is pretty much all that remains of the wall that at one time surrounded the city, but in a few areas we can see remnants of it, such as in these houses where it forms part of its integral structure still. And it wasn't just the wall that Logroño built with those extra funds. They added on to other parts of the city. That Church of Santiago, where the city council met and made that fateful decision to resist the siege of the French, was added on to and received its current facade. Likewise, the co-cathedral of Logroño was largely built within the century following the attack. And the fact that Logroño is getting a co-cathedral is a big indication of its growing economic and political strength. And while all this is happening, right in front of that Redonda Cathedral, a market square is built that you can see here in this photo, indicating that Logroño is becoming, a center of commerce, art, and ideas. And this trajectory had started even before the siege, when Guillén de Brocar came and brought his printing press to Logroño. And this was a relatively recent invention all across Europe. And it came here to Logroño. And a paper mill was developed along the way. So Logroño became a real sort of center for the dissemination of ideas and information. And while all of this is happening, Logroño's population is also growing by up to maybe as much as 40% within a century, so that Logroño is surpassing cities that had been its equals only a few decades previously. Let's take another look now at the coat of arms that is above the Puerta de Revellín, before the gateway. As a coat of arms, this is how Logroño chooses to represent itself to its own citizens, to visitors, and to posterity. So the emblems that are within it represent what is fundamental to Logroño's identity. So let's take a look at them one by one. First, we have the cross of Santiago and the accompanying scallop shells, which are a symbol of St. James. And that's because pilgrims for hundreds and hundreds of years, religious as well as non-religious, have been coming through Logroño, and they continue to do so today from all corners of the world. And then, as now, they left their money and lodging and food and other amenities along the way. And Logroño had to develop services to meet that demand that was coming through. Now, if we move on, we look at the stone bridge and the Ebro River. Now, chances are that if you see pilgrims in Logroño today, and you see them all the time, they've entered the city crossing over that same bridge, just as people did at least since the 11th century and probably since before. And last but not least, we have those three Fleurs de Lys. And those three little flowers, again, mark a moment when Logroño's citizens stood shoulder to shoulder against adversity, not knowing what the outcome would be, if there was any guarantee of safety. Now, these symbols and that moment are doubtless far from the minds of Logroñeses as they go about their daily business. But it's very fitting that once a year, on June 11th, they remember those events and a part of who they are. So I hope that you've enjoyed watching and learning a little bit about Logroño's history and the siege. And if you come here someday, perhaps some of the parts of the city will already seem more familiar to you. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. Please feel free to leave your comments and suggestions. And remember, keep learning. Thanks for watching. It's been a blast.